I thought my brother just wanted to talk about our parents or some small family problem. Instead, he asked me to sit down like he was about to change my life forever. What he said next shattered an old certainty I didn't even know I was clinging to, and forced me to see myself and him in a completely new way. Greetings, dear listeners. Before I begin telling this complicated story of my life, I ask you to support our channel, subscribe, leave a like, and write in the comments which city you are listening from. This is very important for us. And now, enjoy listening. I remember exactly how the room looked when my brother asked me to sit down. That's how I know this moment mattered, even before I understood why. The late afternoon light was slanting through the blinds in our small living room, turning the dust in the air into tiny floating sparks. The couch sagged a little in the middle, like it always did, and the coffee table still had a ring from where I'd set my mug down that morning. Ordinary things, safe things. The kind of details your mind clings to when something inside you senses that normal life is about to tilt. "Can you sit for a minute?" he asked. My brother has never been dramatic. He's older than me by almost a decade, and growing up, he was always the steady one. The person who fixed the sink without complaining, who showed up early to school meetings, who stood behind me silently when I was nervous, like a wall you could lean on without asking. So when he said it like that, quietly, not looking at his phone, not joking, my stomach tightened. "Sure," I said, trying to sound casual as I lowered myself onto the couch. He didn't sit right away. He paced once, then twice, his socks whispering against the rug. I noticed his hands. They were clenched and unclenched, like he was practicing how to hold something fragile without breaking it. "I've been meaning to talk to you," he said. That sentence alone could mean 100 things. Money, our parents, something from the past I'd forgotten, but he hadn't. I nodded, waiting, suddenly aware of how loud the refrigerator sounded in the kitchen. He finally sat across from me, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. When he looked up, his eyes weren't sharp or angry. They were tired and careful. That scared me more than shouting ever could. "I need you to hear me all the way through," he said. "And I need you to trust that I'm saying this because I respect you." Respect. The word landed heavy in my chest. "Okay," I whispered. There was a long pause. In that silence, memories crowded in. Him teaching me how to ride a bike. Him waiting outside my first job because it was dark. Him arguing with our father when I was too young to know what the argument was really about. I realized I'd always seen him as someone who protected me from hard truths. And suddenly, he was about to hand me one. "I'm not your brother," he said. At first, I thought I'd misheard him. My mind searched for a joke, a metaphor, anything softer than the blunt shape of those words. I laughed once, weakly, then stopped when he didn't smile. "What do you mean?" I asked. He swallowed. "I mean, not in the way you think." My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I felt 18 and 5 and 22 all at once, like all the versions of me were sitting there together, waiting. He explained slowly, about paperwork, about choices made before I was old enough to remember, about a promise he'd made to someone who trusted him more than anyone else in the world. As he spoke, I felt something loosening inside me, like a knot I hadn't known was there, slowly being untied. I learned that the story I'd grown up with was incomplete. Not a lie, exactly. Just edited, for love, for stability, for my sake. "I didn't want you to feel different," he said quietly. "I didn't want you to feel like you owed anyone anything." I stared at him, my vision blurring, not from shock alone, but from a strange sense of recognition. Pieces of my life suddenly rearranged themselves, the way relatives looked at me sometimes, the questions I'd never known how to ask, the feeling, deep down, that I'd been searching for something without knowing its name. "You could have told me," I said, my voice shaking. "I know," he replied, "but I was scared, and I wanted you to have a normal childhood more than I wanted to ease my own guilt." We sat there, facing each other, the past stretching between us like a bridge I just realized existed. I felt angry, grateful, lost, seen, all at once. And in that moment, as the light shifted and the room grew quieter, I understood something important. Whatever he wasn't by blood, he had been by choice, by action, by staying. I didn't know yet how this truth would change me, but I knew one thing for certain. Life had just asked me to see my brother and myself with new eyes. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my childhood bed, staring at the faint crack in the ceiling that I used to imagine was a river when I was younger. The house felt different after what he told me, like the walls had shifted slightly when no one was looking. Every sound seemed louder. The tick of the clock in the hallway, a car passing outside. Even my own breathing felt unfamiliar, like I was borrowing someone else's lungs. I kept replaying his words, not just what he said, but how he said it. Carefully, respectfully, like he was handing me something fragile and trusting me not to drop it. That realization softened the shock just enough to let something else seep in. Gratitude, confusion, a strange, aching tenderness I didn't know where to place. Sometime near dawn, I heard him moving in the kitchen. The low clink of a mug against the counter. I considered pretending to sleep, hiding in the safety of silence, but my body moved before my fear could catch up. I wrapped myself in a sweater and walked down the hall. He was standing by the window, staring out like he was waiting for something to happen in the street. When he heard me, he turned slowly, his face lined with exhaustion. "Hey," he said softly. "Hey," I replied. We stood there for a moment, unsure of the new shape of us. Finally, he gestured toward the table. "Coffee." I nodded. The normalcy of the question almost broke me. We sat across from each other, the same table where we'd eaten cereal and argued over homework and laughed at stupid jokes. Now it felt like neutral ground, a place to renegotiate who we were. "I keep thinking I should feel angrier," I said, wrapping my hands around the mug, "but mostly I just feel unsteady." "That makes sense," he said. "You don't owe any particular reaction." I looked at him, then really looked. The familiar curve of his nose, the faint scar on his chin from when he'd slipped on ice years ago, all the small things that had always been there. If blood mattered, wouldn't I have noticed the absence before now? "Why now?" I asked. "Why tell me this now?" He exhaled slowly. "Because you're grown. Because you're making your own choices. And because every time you looked at me like I was your whole foundation, it felt like I was standing on a lie." That sentence landed quietly but deeply. I realized then that this confession wasn't just about me. It was about him finally allowing himself to be seen fully, flaws and all. "Do you regret it?" I asked. "Raising me, I mean." He didn't hesitate. "Never. Not once." Something in my chest loosened at that. I remembered nights when he'd sat on the edge of my bed until I fell asleep. The way he'd listen when I talked about my dreams, even when they changed every year. None of that was obligation. It was choice. "I think I'm scared," I admitted. If this part of my life wasn't what I thought, what else isn't? He reached across the table, stopping just short of touching my hand, as if asking permission without words. I nodded, and his fingers closed around mine, warm and steady. "Truth doesn't erase what came before," he said. "It just adds depth to it." Later that day, I went for a walk alone. The neighborhood looked the same, but I felt like I was seeing it through a new lens. The park bench where he'd waited while I played. The corner store where he taught me how to count change. Each memory didn't disappear. It rearranged itself, taking on a richer meaning. By evening, when I returned home, I realized something quietly powerful. My identity wasn't collapsing. It was expanding. I wasn't losing a brother. I was learning the full measure of a man who had chosen me, day after day, without obligation. And for the first time since he'd asked me to sit down, I felt the beginnings of balance returning, slow and uncertain, but real. The next few days felt strange, like walking through a familiar city in a foreign language. Everything looked the same, but the words I'd been using to describe my life no longer fit. I kept catching myself staring at my brother, noticing little things I had never really seen before. The way he rubbed the back of his neck when he was deep in thought, the small crease near his eyes that appeared only when he was genuinely amused, the way he always left the kitchen counter perfectly clean, as if he wanted the world to be ordered when everything inside it wasn't. It was on the third evening after our conversation that he invited me to help him with something in the garage. I hesitated. The garage had always been his domain, a place filled with tools I didn't know how to use and projects I didn't understand. But there was a softness in his voice that made it hard to say no. As I stepped inside, the air smelled faintly of sawdust and motor oil. shadows stretched along the walls, broken by the warm glow of a single overhead light. I noticed how meticulously everything was organized, yet somehow lived in, as if the space itself reflected the balance he carried between order and imperfection. "What are we doing?" I asked, trying to mask the flutter in my chest. "You'll see," he replied, moving toward a workbench. He held up a small wooden box, its surface rough but carefully sanded. "I thought we could finish this together." I picked up a piece of sandpaper, uncertain. He showed me how to smooth the edges gently, and then, for the first time in days, conversation flowed easily between us. We didn't talk about his revelation or the legal documents or the long-hidden truths. Instead, we talked about our favorite movies as kids, about how he had once tried to teach me to ride a bike backwards just for fun, about how I used to leave my socks everywhere and he would secretly gather them without complaining. It was ordinary, and yet it wasn't. The air between us held something new, a fragile trust, freshly formed and glowing in its subtlety. When the box was finally finished, I noticed the care in his hands, the way he held each piece as if it were precious. "It's perfect," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. "It's not perfect," he said, smiling softly, "but it's ours." I realized then that the revelation hadn't broken our bond. It had transformed it. What we were building now, both literally and figuratively, was different, but no less real. After that, our days began to feel stitched together in a new pattern. We cooked meals together, debated over books he knew I would never finish, and shared long silences that were no longer uncomfortable. The quiet wasn't filled with secrets anymore. It was filled with presence. One evening, as I was packing up a sketchbook I'd abandoned years ago, he asked, "Do you ever feel like life is just moments stacked together, and we only notice the important ones after they're gone?" I paused, pen hovering over a blank page. "Yes," I said slowly, "and sometimes the moments that seem small at the time, they end up being the ones that change everything." He nodded, a shadow of a smile crossing his face. "Exactly. That's why I waited. I wanted you to have all the small moments before I asked you to see the truth." I leaned back in my chair and watched him. His eyes held a vulnerability I had never allowed myself to see before, and I realized how much courage it took for him to sit me down, to tell me the things that could have pushed me away. I felt a swelling of admiration and love, not the easy, casual love of family, but a deeper, chosen kind of love, born of honesty and trust. That night, I went to bed feeling a subtle shift inside me. I wasn't fully at peace yet. There were still questions, uncertainties, but for the first time, I didn't feel like my world had collapsed. Instead, it felt like it had expanded, opening into corners I hadn't known existed. I began to understand that life's surprises weren't just disruptions. They could also be invitations. Invitations to see people and yourself in a fuller, richer light. And as I drifted to sleep, I knew that the conversation we had in the living room was only the beginning. Our story, my story, was still unfolding, but now it was unfolding in a way that promised discovery, connection, and a depth I had never imagined. The days that followed carried a quiet intensity. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was the kind of change that seeps into your bones, reshaping your steps and the way you look at the world. I noticed it in the small routines, the way he brewed coffee without asking if I wanted cream because he already knew, the way I found myself stopping mid-sentence to really listen when he spoke, the way our silences felt full rather than empty. One afternoon, we decided to clean out the attic. It was a dusty, forgotten space, filled with cardboard boxes and the faint smell of mildew. Sunlight slanted through a small window, illuminating particles of dust that danced like tiny stars. As we moved boxes, I found my old notebooks, sketches, letters I had written to no one. My brother crouched beside me, handling each item as if it were a relic from another life. "You always kept everything," he said, shaking his head with a small grin. "I didn't want to forget," I replied. Even the small things seemed important. "That's good," he said softly, "because those small things, they build the foundation for the person you are now." I stopped and looked at him, really looked. The man sitting beside me wasn't just my brother. He was someone who had chosen me over and over, without obligation. someone who had given me love, stability, and trust. Even when he carried secrets heavier than I could imagine, and in his quiet way, he had taught me a lesson I hadn't known I needed. That family is not just blood, and that honesty, even when delayed, can deepen the bonds we hold most dear. We found a box of old photographs, yellowed with age. I picked one up, a picture of us at the park. Probably 10 years ago, I remember that day. I was laughing at something trivial, and he was holding my hand, steady and sure. Nothing in the photo hinted at the weight he had been carrying behind the scenes. Holding it now, I felt a sudden warmth, a recognition of the countless unseen moments where love had quietly, persistently existed. "I've been thinking," I said, my voice almost a whisper, "about how much courage it must have taken for you to tell me the truth." He looked at me, and for the first time, I noticed a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. "I was scared," he admitted. "Scared he'd see me differently. Scared I'd lose you, but I realized you'd see me no matter what. And I wanted you to see all of me, not just the parts I thought were safe." The attic, cluttered and dusty as it was, became a sacred space for our conversation. It wasn't just about old memories or photographs. It was about acknowledgement, acceptance, and growth. I realized that life had a way of revealing truths at the precise moment we were ready to understand them. For me, that moment had come. Later, we sat on the stairs, looking at the setting sun through the attic window. The orange glow filled the space, softening the edges of the dust and the shadows. I leaned back, feeling a calm I hadn't known since that first conversation. "I think I understand now," I said. "Not just about you, but about myself too. That even when things feel uncertain, even when life surprises you, there's room for trust, for love, for choice." He nodded, his hand brushing mine briefly. "Exactly. And that's all anyone can really hope for: connection, honesty, and the courage to keep showing up for the people they care about." As night fell, I walked back into the living room and looked around our home. The ordinary couch, the coffee table with the faint ring, the light slanting through the blinds. Everything was the same. And yet, everything was different. I had been handed a truth that could have changed me in ways I didn't want. But instead, it expanded me. It made me more aware, more compassionate, more grateful for the person who had been quietly steadfast all along. Sitting down beside him later that evening, I realized that our bond wasn't defined by what had been hidden. It was defined by the choices we made from that moment forward, choices of honesty, care, and presence. And in that understanding, I discovered something profound. Family, in all its forms, is not about perfection. It's about showing up day after day and seeing each other fully. That night, as I drifted off to sleep, I felt a sense of peace I had never known. The world outside continued as it always had, full of noise and uncertainty. But inside, in the quiet corners of our shared lives, I had found clarity, connection, and an unexpected depth of love. And I knew that whatever the future held, the trust we had rebuilt, and the truths we now held, would carry us through anything.